Hi, my name is Jacqueline Langham, and I read Michael D'Antonio's Mortal Sins. I think that through his book, he is trying to show that the Catholic Church has fostered sexual abuse among its clergy and disregarded the crisis even when it became an international scandal. I think this happened through the culture of the church, the way that the public provoked the exposure of the problem, and how after making commitments to better the situation, the church has yet to be able to stop the crisis. The culture of the church has created this environment that has perhaps attracted these problems and has allowed them to be sustained. Part of this is the unrealistic notion of celibacy and outdated concepts of sex. As far as celibacy was concerned, all sex is considered sinful, no matter who it's with or what it entails. And chapter 6 talks about that. Also, Sipe concluded that there were fewer than 2%, of priests managed to actually stay celibate. He talked about that in chapter 10, and this shows just how, just that there are expectations not being met regarding celibacy, and how that creates this environment of shame around sex to begin with, and obviously makes it not a topic open for discussion. Very rumored based and hush hush culture around that. The church also became a sanctuary for men with psychological problems, problems with alcoholism, and I think this is partially because of the autonomy you have in society. No one is suspecting of you. Only higher ups are checking your power, and as the book shows, it doesn't necessarily do that quite so intensely. And also, among the culture of the church was that even when sexual abuse was reported, it was not taken seriously. In all of the cases that D'Antonio talks about, bishops knew all along about problems, and there were always rumors, and it didn't seem to matter very much at all in defrocking a priest or suspending them or even reporting them to authorities. There's also this protect your own culture within the church, and protecting the image of the church. And that means that even those that spoke out about the problems, such as Charles Curran, just messages that weren't completely aligned with the ones that the church wanted to be shared with the public, you're kind of completely cut off from it. And that creates it so that even if you want to say something about what's going on, you can't. Canon laws made it was kind of a half-hearted way of dealing with poor behavior in the church, especially sexual abuse with priests. Partially because it didn't really punish you in a legal way, it didn't imprison you or fine you, and simply by claiming that you were drunk or under the influence or psychologically impaired, you were immune to any sort of punishment in any way that they would do that. Chapter 3 kind of talked about that. As far as treatment for sexual offenders, when perhaps reports were taken seriously enough to lead to some sort of treatment center, they were unspecialized in the matter of pedophilia or just sexual abusers anyway. And it also kind of had this bias where it would protect the church over the community and also just their duty to help the priest get well, if at all possible. As I mentioned earlier, power also became among the is part of the culture of the church. You're only checked by your higher ranking people, and when your higher ups didn't question the priests, no one would in society. Therefore, when these problems would occur, they would just continue to happen because no one would suspect a priest of doing such a thing. The second way I think that this kind of fostering of sexual abuse happened, and the church disregarding it, is how the public provokes the exposure of the problem, beginning with the Gastel case. What was great about that was that it made it so that it was kind of the first step in not accepting gag orders anymore, and making it so that documents would be released. Among kind of the opening of the eyes of the public was allowing the media to cover trials and stories. Not only did that better the trials because it brought other victims forward, either on separate accounts or sharing the same abuser, which helped the trials. But it also made a possible jury aware of the possibility that a priest was capable of sexually abusing someone, and higher ups were capable of ignoring it, or hiding it and allowing them to travel from parish to parish. And chapter 8 and 9 talks about that. Part of what also led to the opening of the eyes of the public was making private documents known. A lot of what later in the book talks about is websites being created of a lot of scanned documents that made it easier for bishops and priests to be tried. And that was really great activism work, mostly. Speaking of activism, networks for survivors like SNAP really helped with the exposure of the church. They approached the church on multiple occasions publicly about how to better the system and telling their stories, which kind of pulled on the heartstrings of those in charge, or so they had hoped. It gave victims a place to be accepted as people who come out about sexual abuse, instead of this risk of experiencing trauma all over again through being met with resistance. It really gave them a community. Chapter 10 talks about that a bit. Another really interesting topic that was talked about was the idea of memory, and chapter 13 talks about that, and how this debate over whether a memory can be suppressed until someone's an adult, and what that means for trial, and what that means for the victim getting receiving any sort of like justice or compensation for what had happened to them. There's some believe that memories cannot be suppressed, and others believe that it possibly can be. And that kind of affected the way that victims were seen when they were coming out after a long time of actually what had happened to them. The last big problem that the book addressed was that despite commitments to trying to better the problem, the church has yet to be able to stop the crisis, hence the international spread of the problem. After meeting with SNAP and establishing a basis for how priests would be reported and suspended, things like that, they reneged on some of those agreements, which was disheartening for those groups. There was a lack of a comprehensive plan to confront the issue. Throughout the book, it talks about how just widespread the church is, and how many different parts to the institution there is, and there's yet to be a sort of plan that included all aspects of it. I think one of the biggest problems that the book addresses is that it creates a culture of hypocrisy around Catholic leaders. As was mentioned many times, I know, speaking of Jeffrey Anderson, he has been quoted as saying that how can the church uh, claim a moral high ground when their actions show they are far from morally superior. And I think that really trickled down to the public with seeing whether or not they could trust their church and take it seriously. What I liked about the book was that it certainly humanized um, clergymen, which I believe to be the point, but it also took lawyers such as Anderson and humanized them as well. They were doing this great work, but I think it really brought them on the same level, talking about their alcoholism and issues like that. I think it really put them on a level playing field, and I think it made it so that no one is claiming, as writer of the book, it's showing that no one's claiming to be better than anyone in that case, and that all people are entitled to hold one another accountable for their actions, and I think that was really shown there. Perhaps there wasn't enough of a defense for the good things the Catholic Church did. I understand that the point wasn't to point out all the great things about the church, but the book is constantly mentioned how the church is a force for good, and at the end, I found myself wondering, well, what then? What is so wonderful about it? If those who are supposed to be closest to their higher power can't seem to get his message right, then what is the message? But that's just a personal question, I guess, that I found myself asking at the end of the book. Thus concludes my presentation on the novel. Thank you.